Hello, my fellow Warcraft campaign and content creators. This is a new and updated tutorial for the world editor in Warcraft Reforged. Now, due to, well, how much of a bomb this remaster was, if we're just going to be honest, there hasn't been a whole lot of content that has been too helpful when it comes to creating campaigns or custom maps. And while the vast majority of people refunded or did not purchase this game, there's still a pretty healthy amount of people who are content creators in this world editor, and there's plenty of people who want to get into it. And it's a good middle ground between just being imaginative and creative and being a full-blown game developer. There's lots of different ways that this world engine can be useful in your creative projects. If it's just exploring ideas and visualizing an epic fantasy, if you're a dungeon master, or if you just want to do this for fun, which is, in my book, a good enough reason. But there's a whole wide array of reasons that people might want to use this world editor, and it is very dynamic, and there's lots of cool things you can do with it. You can create entirely new games and new game mechanics. You can go very, very deep with this engine, and it is an engine. So, there's a wide array of reasons that somebody might want to use this world editor and how it could be beneficial. And also, I just have a lot of knowledge about it, and I feel like that's kind of going to waste if I don't share that with people before someday I stop using this thing. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get started from scratch. We're gonna go over just some real basic stuff, and then in the next video, that's when we're gonna start going deeper and moving faster. So to just get started, this is the first screen that you're going to see when you load up the world editor. You'll just come into this sort of small blank map, and your unit palette will be open, or your terrain palette, whatever it sets it to by default. So you might be a little confused. All this stuff might look scary up here. Don't worry about any of that. We don't need to go into any of that right now, and you can just take that all at your own leisure. So for starters, let's just start with the basic camera control. So you right click and hold, and you can shift around. If you hold control and right click, you change the angle of the camera. If your camera's all messed up and you want to set it back to normal, click the middle mouse button. So the scroll, click the scroll, and it'll set it back to the default. So hold control, right click, you can move around like that. Don't hold control and right click, and you actually move where the camera is. So that's basic camera function. Also, if you're scrolling out and you want to be able to see the whole map and this is bothering you, this is the render distance. You hold control and then scroll out, so down, and it will extend that. So you can zoom out and then hold control, and you can do that. And if you don't want to see this annoying grid, press G and it'll annoy you more, and then press G again and it'll go away. And of course, just press G to cycle through those if you want them. So here we are, we're on this very blank map. Alright, how can I start doing stuff? Okay, so, well, first of all, let's go through the terrain palette. So, also, you can press T, and it will switch to that window. So if I go to this window and then I press T, it switches me back to the terrain palette. So up here, we've got our different tiles. So this is just going to change, the tile. So that's going to change how that looks. Do that, and you could put some grass over here. Surround that with rough dirt. Maybe there's people who walk around this, whatever. So there's your tile. This is where you can adjust your cliff height, and you can also add water. The default cliff height for any map is 2, which means that you can dig down 2 spaces, but you can go up a whole lot more. And you can change that later, don't worry. But so that's just where you start on most maps, is that default cliff level. And if you don't want these annoying grassy cliffs, you can change your cliff type right here. So get rid of those, and then you can do this, and there we go, yeah. Now that looks a little bit more consistent with the theme. And you know what? This grass is a little bit too thick, so let's do the grassy dirt. so that it looks a little bit more like a desert. There we go. Alright, and then down here you have your ways that you can morph the terrain. So you can do noise, and you can change your brush size right here. There's all these different brush sizes. So noise is just going to mess it up, jumble it, make it look real messy. And if this is too much, you can go over here to smooth, and you can click, and it'll only smooth it as you move the mouse. So click and hold, and you can do that, and you can see it'll kind of smooth it out. And if you feel like that did too much, you can Control Z, undo, and then just do a quick brush, just like that. And I can change my angle so that I can see. Okay, yeah, that looks a little more natural. And then down here too, there's also, you can change the shape from circle to square so that your brush changes. So now let's go through the water. So you can go over here and you can put deep water. Just so you know, deep water is going to try to dig down 2 spaces, whereas shallow water is only going to try to dig down 1 space. And if you try to do shallow water in shallow water, you can see it's just going to stay there like that. But if you want this to be deeper in the middle, you can go to deep water, and there you go. So now it goes shallow into deep. Say you want a shallow pool like this, and you want units to be able to walk through it. Well, the way we're going to be able to do that is we're going to make this big thing like this. You're going to want a straight line for ramps. It's just kind of, ramps just work better this way. They don't really, yeah, if you see, ramps look really bad when you try to do them diagonally. So we're going to just do them vertical or horizontal. And if you press P, you can see the pathing. And you see this color here is where the units cannot tread. Whereas everything else, the units can walk through. So now there's a way that the units can get through into this shallow water here. And again, you just press P to change the pathing view. So here we go. We've got this little area now. So that's the terrain. That's pretty much the ins and outs. You've obviously got other things too. You can lower terrain. You can dip it down. You can heighten it. You can just take things up really, really high. And if you zoom in, you can get a look at how that's going to look if you try to angle cameras on it. It's a good effect for mountains too, to raise the terrain like that naturally, and then put the cliffs at the top of where you've raised that terrain. So a unit could walk up to this, but then they can't actually get to the tops of the mountains. So there's another good idea as well. Oh, and these are blight. So this has to do with the undead in the Warcraft skirmishes. In Warcraft, if you don't know, undead, if you're playing as them, wherever you place your base or buildings, they corrupt the ground around it. So that's all this is really for. You can use it as a creative effect. It won't hurt units that walk on it or anything. Yeah, so you can just use that at your own leisure. It will, however, always put that rough dirt around it, if you see that there, which is a little frustrating. I think maybe you can fill that back in. Yeah, you can. You can fill it back in if you want to. But yeah, I almost never use the blight unless, you know, I don't know, for some fantasy reason. But yeah, so that's all the blight is up there. Okay, so, oh, and then last but not least, there's plateau. So if you go down here, say you want to raise this up, and then you're like, oh wait, I want it all to be that level now. You can hit plateau and click and hold, and you can make these mesas, these plateaus. So that would also be very good for if you're trying to develop desert mountains, mesas. So very cool. So that's the terrain. That's basically the whole ins and outs of the terrain window. There's all kinds of ways that you can obviously mess with this stuff, and you can start working in different tile sets and custom tile sets later. We'll go over that in a little bit. So up next, we've got the Doodad palette. So the Doodad palette is just your props, if you don't know. So there's going to be these subcategories, right? You're going to have themes. So most of the stuff you're going to be looking for is probably going to be in Cityscape, because I imagine you're looking for city building structures so that you can build towns and stuff like that. So Doodads, Cityscape, structures. That's where you're going to find that stuff. If you want walls, like city walls, those are in Destructibles. They're going to be way down at the bottom. You're going to find these stone walls. And if you don't like the cartoony sizes of these and you want to better size them to be more accurate next to unit models, we will go over that later in the tutorial series, don't worry. But that's more advanced stuff. So Doodads is where you're going to find your props. It's where you're going to find trees, you know. Oh, those are chopped trees, sorry. That's where you're going to find trees and all that kind of stuff. And then we can go also into water. This is where you can find some water props like bubbles. You can put these effects. And these little boxes, they won't actually show up in the game. So don't worry, there's nothing you have to do to disable that. You'll only see the effect when you load up the game. You can also do waterfalls. And you can put ships that are floating, you know, or sunken in the water. You can put seaweed, all these kinds of things. You can also go into cinematic, and here you can find a lot of stuff like smoke smudges, fire, blue fire, fire gusts, stuff like that. So this is where you can find these sorts of effects. And later I'll show you how you can use the trigger editor to get these sorts of effects to spawn in and spawn out of the world at certain moments, or based on certain player actions or those kinds of things. And again, we'll cover all that stuff in the trigger editor later. But so that's your Doodad palette. You're just going to find lots of props, you're going to find bridges, you're going to find buildings, and again you can change this theme here so you can find all different kinds of props and work them in however you want. So that's the Doodad window. And then you've got the unit window. Now, every map that you ever make, the player is going to be automatically set to player 1 red. So anything you place like this, when you go now to test the map, and don't worry about what that says, I'll tell you what that means in a second. When you go up here to test the map, anything placed for player 1 red is going to be the unit that you actually control in this test version. So these are your player controlled. If you want neutral enemies that aren't controlled by a computer or anything like that, you want to click up here and you want to go down to neutral hostile. And again, I'm going to go to Cityscape because that's where you'll probably find the stuff you're looking for. Bandits, rogues, you know, these guys that these units can fight to get gold and to get experience and stuff like that. So these are just your monsters. That's what neutral hostile are. They're monsters, they're just stuff that are there, players can't control them, but any player or CPU can kill them. So say you want one character that your player controls. So let's play this one guy, place this one guy here. And then you just want one enemy that he fights. Well, you're going to want to put that under neutral hostile. So, neutral hostile, bandits, there you go. Now these guys will fight this guy, and this guy will be controlled by the player. So, neutral hostile is where you're going to find the bulk of enemies and things that you're looking for your player to defeat. And player 1 underneath melee and both campaign, and we'll get into custom later. Campaign is where you can also find lots of different kinds of models, high elves and things like that from the campaign models. So you actually will probably come to the campaign section a lot more often because there's a lot more dynamic models and stuff that you can work with if you're working with the campaign section. So there you go. That's the terrain, doodad, and unit palettes. And with those three, you should honestly be able to kind of get started working on whatever it is you want to work on. And the more advanced stuff is going to start up in the next part of the video. Before I go, just in case you're wondering, we didn't touch on region or camera palettes because this stuff has to do with the trigger editor. So you can see there's nothing really to do in these windows right now. This is going to be important for later when you're trying to get, you know, this unit walks to this area. What happens next? That's how the trigger editor works, basically. So we'll go over that stuff a little bit later. So that's the basics. That's terrain, units, and props. If you have any specific questions on any of these categories, please leave that in the comment section below. I'm going to go ahead and start working on the next part of this video, where we will cover some much more in-depth and complicated things, and I'll give you some tips and tricks as well. And also, just so you know, going forward, the game I'm going to design with this engine is going to be a single-player, isometric, hack-and-slash sort of Diablo RPG, but with some deeper RPG elements to it, because I'm all about that. So stay tuned, subscribe, go to the next video if you want to see how you can make your own single-player isometric RPG in this engine. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that this covered most of the basics that you need, and again, comment for anything specific, and I'll see you in the next one.